My name is John Dawson, and doing a video today on ways of drawing and painting on wood panel. I basically stole this idea from my friend Mark McDowell, so it seems only fair that we should go off to his studio and we'll see Mark's approach to doing drawings on a wood panel. And then we'll be back to my studio to see the way that I approach doing artwork on a wood panel.
I'm Mark McDowell. I'm a professional artist. I paint and draw, studied printmaking and drawing. Today we're going to talk a little bit about drawing on wood. For about the last 20 years I have dedicated my studio efforts to color pencil drawings on sheets of plywood. I'm beginning today on a drawing of an image that is fond to me. I've done it before. I'm drawing color pencil on wood. The wood I choose mostly is plywood, birch. Plywood, I buy it at the hardware store. Birch is soft enough that it receives the pencil well. My method is fairly simple. I work small as a preparatory sketch, and when appropriate I can enlarge them from there, but my manner of enlarging is a little modern. I take a snapshot. This is a snapshot I took with my phone of a drawing that I had already done that was about 8 inches tall. I use the computer to enlarge it and to print it out on a piece of copy paper. I locate it on my board, tape it down in place where I would like it to be. What I do next is, with that chalked paper underneath there, that transfer paper, I take a ballpoint pen. I happen to use a red one because I can see where I'm drawing. So I come along and I draw over my image. Not the whole thing. I'm not interested in getting a finished drawing. I just want to get to scale on the board the general shapes. So having taken the ballpoint pen, I use a red one so I can see. So if the phone rings or a buddy comes over and I get interrupted, I can come back 2 minutes, 10 minutes next day and see where I left off. It is to, because this is chalk, it will wipe off. So my method is, shortly after my initial drawing with the transfer of the chalk, I come over with a black or a blue-black pencil and draw my chalk lines down. Again, I'm not looking to finish draw anything. I'm just getting the general shapes down onto the board. A pencil, a color pencil, is made up of pigment and wax. Whereas watercolor is pigment in a water suspension, oil paint is pigment in an oil suspension, color pencil is pigment in wax. After a certain number of passes with the wax, the wood does not take pencil very well anymore. So I have come to learn that with the softness of this wood, birch, and the wax content of these pencils, that I can get 2 or 3 solid coats across there, which is my method. So a couple of little notes about the nature of the pencils I use. There are many kinds of pencils out there, brands, there's in all price points. And I've tried them all, and I have found that the Prismacolor, who makes pencils and have for many years, is it's not a super pricey pencil. It's in the moderate range, probably on the lower end of the pencil spectrum as far as prices go. But I find that it has a good ratio of pigment to wax, a pretty lush amount of pigment, and just enough wax to hold it in place. I did try some of the more expensive imported pencils and did not find them to be, not only were they not as soft and pigment rich, they were extremely expensive. You may notice that this pencil is taped in the middle with 2 pencils, so that it's short to this and no longer fits into the sharpener, rendering it useless. A piece of masking tape. Scotch tape will work, just a little piece of tape. Lay it flat on your work surface, put half the pencil on one side, take another pencil, match up to it, roll it like a burrito. Now you have a pencil extender, allowing it to get fully into the sharpener right down to the end of the pencil. This is a drawing that is finished, made up of lots of cross hatches. But fundamentally, this was drawn exactly like I'm doing the fish on the chicken's back. A caricature was drawn in blue-black pencil. And then the underdrawing, much like in painting you can put an underpainting, I do underdrawing. So underneath all of these little hatches, these scratches, which are called hatches, and when you move them around and cross over them, they're called cross hatches. But the hatches and the tones are how you begin to shape the form. So my method is lay down a base color. In this case, it's going to be a couple of tones of blue, some green to sort of insinuate that there might be grass there, the yellows, the silver for the fish, and then I'll spend my additional second and third passes over that. And this would be sort of what this looks like when I put the first pass on. I'm just sort of interested in getting some color, to assign some color. Later I'll come back and do this stuff and decorate it all up. Would add that pencil in wood, you are sort of squashing pigment and wax into the grain of the wood, so erasure is not a big option. It's hard to erase out of the grain of wood. Now if you had to, you could sand it down, you could get a razor blade and scrape it out, but then you're changing the texture of the wood by doing that, and it would take the pencil differently and ultimately would show differently. So after the initial base color that has been laid on, and I do this this could be fairly haphazard. One of the little tricks I like to do to keep myself in the edges, because as you can see some of my lines are pretty straight, I put a little stop up against here. So lay it along the line, and it gives me a place to stop. So I don't have to worry about dead ending right on that line freehand all the time, which you can do like this. But if you have a little plastic stop, it could be the edge of a ruler, it could be a business card, it could be most anything. It gives you a little something to bump up against with the pencil. I tend to draw slowly and think ahead so that I reduce the chances of mistakes. When it's all done and all of the layers are on there, and like I said, with wax pencils on this kind of wood, you can get 2 or 3 layers on there before it starts getting too shiny to take pencil. When it's all done, I put a varnish coat on it. Varnish coat is a protective coat, and it serves a couple of purposes. Initially, it protects the drawing from dirt, dust, grime, people rubbing their hands on them like this. But it does a second thing, and that is what has to do with the color. The pigment in pencils are generally minerals, and they generally oxidize, much like the car paint does on your car when left out in the sun for years. It oxidizes, which means it gets sort of a haze of oxidation on it. Not rust, but a haze. The same happens with colored pencil, and in some cases paint. So by putting a varnish coat over it when it's finished, you can protect it from the oxygen and hence oxidation, and it keeps the colors rich and full. I use, on the smaller drawings, I use a traditional spray varnish that comes in a can that all the manufacturers make. When we get into super large drawings, I do a different method, because if you've ever used spray paint or spray varnish, there's a fan shape of the liquid that sprays out, and as you go back and forth over it, if it's on a real big drawing, you can see your tracks where you were. So if I am doing a drawing that's 6 feet by 8 feet or 8 feet by 10 feet, I leave this method of can spray behind, and I use an big air gun like people paint houses with. And I use a water-based Varathane varnish. And winds up looking the same. It just sprays a big fan out across it, and because it is water-based, it dries a little slower. And so where one layer of varnish goes over, by the time you come back with the air gun and spray the next big layer over it, this has not dried enough to leave tracks yet. And that's my method for drawing on the wood. The wood comes again from a hardware store. There is nothing special. You could use other woods. The harder the wood is, oak, walnut, hardwoods as they call them, they are a denser grain and a tighter grain, and they do not take pencil quite as well. The other thing about birch that I like is it is a blonde wood, so to speak. It's a light colored wood, and it just makes sense that if you're trying to get bright color, you have more luck getting bright color from a light colored wood than if I'm to paint or draw on top of a walnut or cherry, where you already have a dark background to begin with. So those are some of the basic methods I use, and it wouldn't matter if it was this size or if it was 8 feet by 12 feet. Just takes more time.
Well, unfortunately, in a video like this, you really can't see the incredible quality of Mark's work. They are truly amazing pieces. Mark is not only one of the finest artists in Arizona, he's one of the finest artists anywhere. And at the end of the video, we'll have other examples of Mark's work, which at least gives you a little bit better idea of the really fantastic quality of his work. I get the birch panels from Home Depot. I think Mark does too. I'm not really sure. And I use Prismacolor pencils. They're really the best to use on the birch panels, and as Mark mentioned, birch panels are the best to try and draw and paint on. A lot of my work is fairly large, and one of the things that I do that's a little different than what Mark does, I get birch panels that are about a quarter of an inch thick. The panels that Mark uses, I think, are about a ½ inch thick. I think they're a little bit better, but they can get pretty heavy if they get very large. So I get panels like this that are about a quarter of an inch thick, and then I reinforce it with 1x2 and 1x4s. Then the other thing that I like to do is I tape out the edge with tape. I like the natural color of the birch to act as a kind of frame around the piece, and then once I have done that, then I began the actual painting. The thing that attracted me to working on wood panels to begin with was the hard surface. The thing that I'd like to do is to add other things to the surface, things like other drawings on paper, canvas, ceramic, plexiglass, all sorts of things that you can attach to the hard surface. And I'm going to show you a few examples of those right now. In this particular piece entitled Camille, the background is done in Prismacolor. The bottom of the painting is done in oil paint. The fan is a real fan. The hands and face are done in ceramic. And the face is on a separate wood panel glued to the surface of the painting. On this piece with an African theme, most of it has been done with Prismacolor pencil. The zebras on the right are on a separate piece of canvas glued to the surface of the panel. The two drawings in the middle and bottom are on drawing paper. The little landscape in the left-hand corner is on a separate piece of masonite that has been attached to the panel. This painting is based on a portrait of Thomas More by Holbein. First, I painted an abstract in oils in the background, then did a series of drawings on different kinds of paper, in some cases using gold leaf. The figure is done on a series of panels on which I painted them in oils and then attached them to the panel. This piece, entitled Vanderlei Dreams, the figure is actually on a piece of plexiglass which appears to float over the drawing underneath. The drawing was done entirely with Prismacolor pencils. I then painted the figure on a piece of drawing paper, had it scanned and transferred to a sheet of plexiglass, which then I attached to the panels so that it appears to float. So this is to demonstrate a piece that will be a combination of Prismacolor drawing and oil painting from start to finish. As I mentioned earlier, first I tape out a border. Then I draw in the figures with a regular drawing pencil. Next I began to draw in all the different objects with the Prismacolor pencils. After I have that finished, I start to paint in the areas with the oil paint. Once I have all the painting and drawing finished, I varnish the panel with a product called Liquid made by Winsor Newton. And as you can see here, it tends to make the Prismacolor colors more intense. If the varnish begins to smear, I take a paper towel and kind of blot it up. The smearing doesn't really bother me too much. I don't like the pieces to look too clean to start with anyway. So if there's areas that the Prismacolor smears a little bit, I just blot it up with a paper towel. I apply at least 2 and sometimes 3 coats of varnish. And then I carefully remove the tape. And now we have the finished piece. Well, that about does it for this video on painting and drawing on a wood panel. We'll follow this up with some examples of work by Mark McDowell and a few examples of my own work. We'll also include the web addresses for our websites and Facebook page. And if you're interested, you can subscribe to other instructional videos of mine on YouTube.